Ethan Harris, the first official visit for Gonzaga in the 2026 class, announced his commitment on Saturday to Iowa.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Monday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the FanDuel app today. Well, folks, we got a fun show for you today. We're going to take a stab at ranking the best Gonzaga players in the Mark Few era from the state of California. This will be our sixth iteration of this. We've talked about Oregon and Illinois and Minnesota and Idaho and a couple others as well. And today we're talking about California, where we have quite a few former and even a few current Zags from California on the roster. We'll get to that in the second and third segments, but we are leading today's show with the recruiting news that came out over the weekend. Ethan Harris, a four-star forward from Camas, Washington, who took his official visit to Gonzaga last week, announced his commitment on Saturday to Iowa, going to join Ben McCollum and the Hawkeyes in the Big Ten Conference. And Ethan Harris is a player that we've talked about a few times here on the show. He had named his Final Four a little over a week ago. His Final Four schools included Iowa, of course, as well as Gonzaga, Washington, and Boise State. He took an official visit to Boise State back in late June, took an official visit to Iowa back in late July, and then took his official visit to Washington starting on September 5th, and then Gonzaga's visit starting on September 11th. So without knowing all of the specifics here, typically you will see a high school player commit to a program very shortly after taking their official visit. That is not always obviously the case, but it is frequently the case. If a player leaves your program and then schedules multiple other official visits, you typically do not feel great about that player eventually committing to your program. That is, in fact, what happened here as Harris left that visit at Iowa. Again, I think July 27th was the listed date for that visit, according to 247 Sports. So well over a month ago, about closer to 2 months ago that visit happened, about 6 weeks. And then he had not finalized his visit to Gonzaga, or I believe he hadn't finalized his visit to Washington either. And so for a kid from Camas, Washington, which is just east of Vancouver in the southwest corner of the state, for a kid to schedule 2 official visits to local programs, in-state programs, I feel like Iowa fans probably weren't feeling super great about this. We'd heard that it kind of was a 3-team race. Boise State was sort of out of the running despite being listed in his Final Four. It felt like it was going to be one of the 2 big Washington schools, Washington or Gonzaga, or it was going to end up being Iowa. And of course, it does end up being where Harris goes to join the Hawkeyes. Ben McCollum taking over for longtime head coach Fran McCaffery at Iowa. Ben McCollum was the head coach at Drake last year and previously had been a Division II head coach, one of the most prolific D2 coaches in the history of college basketball. Gets that head coaching job at Drake, immediately leads Drake to a Missouri Valley Conference title, a 12 seed in the NCAA tournament, and then parlayed that into immediately getting a job at the Big Ten level with Iowa. So this is the first commitment for Coach McCollum at Iowa in the 2026 class. A big deal for them. For Gonzaga, I guess I wonder, because of how this timed out, I think there's a handful of different kind of things that could have gone into this. Let me put it this way. I think the immediate reaction of how did Gonzaga miss on this kid? How did a school like Iowa, which is not, a basketball powerhouse by any stretch, a school across the country, like blah, blah, blah. How did Gonzaga miss? That tends to be kind of the conversation anytime a player that was, listed Gonzaga in his top schools or took an official visit, or in this case, both, anytime that happens. But I think it's important to kind of acknowledge that Gonzaga is only going to offer so much. They're not necessarily putting everything out there for every single recruit. This is the first of 5 official visitors for Gonzaga over the next 2 months. Gonzaga has to be able to have Obviously, the finances are not the biggest part of these conversations. There's a great interview with RJ Barsh for the Gonzaga on SI site talking about this and talking about like the business is business. We're going to still talk about it, but we're looking for kids who fit our system, who fit what we do. And I'm not saying Harris didn't fit those things, but I am saying that for Gonzaga, they have a budget and they have a certain amount of money and a certain amount of promises that they're willing to make. And there may have been a situation here where what Iowa was willing to put in, again, whether it's financials or a promise to playing time or things of that nature, Gonzaga just may not have been willing to do. The overall point being Gonzaga's interest level varies. They may have 5 official visitors. They may have this many players that they've reached out to, this many players that they're contacting, but they're not all on the same level. We wouldn't be having this conversation of, maybe Gonzaga wasn't that invested when we're talking about Isaiah Harwell, who of course went to Houston after Gonzaga made a huge push to try to convince him to come to Spokane, the native of Idaho. Or Nick Kamenia, who Gonzaga was incredibly invested in before he shocked everybody and picked Duke. Or the year prior to that, when Gonzaga was heavily invested in 2 5-star recruits in Zoom Diallo, who went to Washington, and Asa Newell, who went to Georgia. Gonzaga was darn invested in those guys. Those, if you want to call those misses, if you want to say that they took a big swing and they whiffed on Asa Newell or Zoom Diallo or Nick Kamenia or Isaiah Harwell, fine. I will not push back on any of those 4 players because it was very clear based on everything that we saw publicly that Gonzaga was really trying to get those kids on campus and they did not land any of them. But every year there are multiple other players that Gonzaga shows interest in, and we don't exactly know the full scope of said interest. But when a player in this, again, just looking at the timeline here, when a player takes a visit to Iowa and chooses not to commit on the spot, chooses not to commit in the immediate aftermath of that visit, waits a full month, and then schedules official visits to schools that you would maybe make the assumption would be more likely to be schools you would want to go to. Most players want to play for the big, prominent programs in their area. Not everybody. Again, if that was the case for Nick Kamenia, he would have gone to Duke. If that was the case for Isaiah Harwell, he would have gone to Gonzaga. But Kamenia would not have gone to Duke. He would have gone to UCLA. He goes to Duke. Harwell goes to Houston. It's not always the case. It's not always the case, obviously. But it seems plausible that Harris was interested in going to Washington or Gonzaga or both, and that the offers that those programs gave him, again, whether we're talking financial, whether we're talking playing time, whether we're talking just kind of general interest in, or like role, like maybe Gonzaga really wanted him to focus more on playing the 4 and Iowa wants him to play more at the 3. I don't know the situation there, but I feel like this is potentially a situation where Gonzaga is being a little bit more picky as opposed to throwing the kitchen sink at a kid who chose to go to Iowa instead of coming to Gonzaga. It's maybe a little bit of both. I'm sure Gonzaga would have welcomed landing their first commitment in the 2026 class, and they didn't bring him onto campus for no reason. They obviously had some interest in the young man, but I would caution that when Gonzaga strikes out on big players that they clearly went hard after, those are the okay, what's going on? Why isn't Gonzaga landing recruits? This just doesn't quite feel like the same situation. It feels more like he took 2 visits to schools he wanted to go to, didn't hear offers that he liked from those 2 schools, and chose to go to, for lack of a better word, I guess, a safety school in Iowa. That's kind of how this situation feels to me, kind of reading between the lines on the timeline of everything and the timeline of the commitment and things of that nature. As we said, 1 of 5 visitors for Gonzaga coming up. Their next visits will be at Craziness in the Kennel. October 4th is the date for that. The visitors will be October 3rd through 5th, and they will be Hurley Brutus, a 6'5" wing from Florida who listed Gonzaga in his top 6, and center Sam Funches from Mississippi, who has a top 10 list, although it is reported that he's focusing on about 4 different programs seriously, including Gonzaga. Both those guys will be here for Craziness. Luca Foster, a top 40 recruit in the class, one of the best shooters in the 2026 group, is set to visit Spokane October 11th. And then Cameron Holmes, a consensus 5-star small forward from Arizona, younger brother of All-American Dayron Holmes. Cameron Holmes is set to visit Gonzaga November 8th for their game against Oklahoma at the Spokane Arena. Well, moving away from our recruiting conversation, folks, we're going to talk about some California Zags. We got 10 of them to rank here, including a potential controversial start to this list. We'll get to that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5-hour energy shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients with 0 sugar and 0 crashes. What I love most is how portable they are. Big taste, tiny shot. You can take it anywhere and get that boost whenever you need it. I've been eyeing this purple berry punch flavor that's out right now. It sounds like the perfect one for me to try next. Honestly, I love how fast it kicks in and then it's sugar-free, so I don't have to worry about having that crash later. Enough with boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5-hour energy shots. Get the favorites you love or be bold and try something new in store and online at www.5hourenergy.com or on Amazon today. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are talking California Zags here to close out the show in the second and third segments. This will be our 6th different state where we have ranked the best players to come from that state in the Mark Few era of Gonzaga basketball. We started with Oregon. We've also done Colorado, Minnesota, Idaho, and Illinois, and now taken on California. This should be a lot of fun. Did some fun research on this, and one thing that really stood out to me was we had eight players who weren't walk-ons, and then we ranked one walk-on a little bit above the rest, and then number 10 is the rest of those kind of walk-on groups. Out of those 9 players that we ranked, 8 of them either transferred to Gonzaga or transferred from Gonzaga. Part of that is that there's been some recent Gonzaga players who've come in the era of the transfer portal where it's much easier to transfer in and out of programs. Although that is not the case for everybody on this list. Many of the players on this list were from a previous era. Some of them were graduate transfers, which was something you were allowed to do without sitting out a year. Some of these guys did end up sitting out a year in the previous era of Gonzaga basketball. It's probably just a fluke or a coincidence that it happens to be such a high percentage of the Zags from California, but it was hard to not notice it. Every time I took the notes, I was like, oh, here's a transfer, here's a transfer, here's a transfer. Just a kind of a wonky thing that I wanted to address here. Also, a couple of Zags on the current roster are from California. One of them is Q, Joaquin Reyes Moore. We'll talk about him later since he's played at Gonzaga. The other one is Parker Jefferson. Parker Jefferson's actually originally from Texas, but played his last year of high school basketball in California. So we'll be interested to see when his basketball reference page is created. I'm guessing it'll say that he is from Texas, but we will find out. And then as a reminder, all of this data in terms of where these players are from is coming from Sports Reference, Basketball Reference. It is the easiest way to pull all of this data without it taking me hours and hours and hours. So that is the way we're doing it. Is it perfect? Probably not, but it is the closest that we're going to have to being able to pull where all of these guys are from. All right, that's enough preamble. Let's get right into it. We're starting with a player that I said it was controversial. Personally, for me, I don't think it's controversial to have him at number 1. It's just controversial because he's not a lot of people, especially older Gonzaga fans, favorite Gonzaga player, and that would be Austin Daye. Austin Daye comes in at number 1 on the list. He was at Gonzaga for 2 years, 2007, 2008, and then again in 08, 09. He's from Irvine, California. Played 67 games at Gonzaga, started 34 of them, averaged about 11.5 points, 6 boards, and 2 blocks. He was on the WCC All-Freshman team in 2008. He also led the conference in free throw percentage as a freshman, 88.1% that year. He was a career 42% three-point shooter on about 2.5 attempts per game. But the reason there's some controversy is that Austin Daye became one of the first players from Gonzaga to leave early to go to the NBA draft. He was not the first. Adam Morrison had done it just 2 years previously. Dan Dickow, I believe, had another year of eligibility when he went to the NBA. It had happened before, but Austin Daye was kind of the first player to really surprise fans. Nobody was surprised when Adam Morrison left. He was a projected top 5 pick. He went 3rd in that draft. Nobody was surprised by that. But Austin Daye wasn't an All-American. Austin Daye wasn't a Wooden Award winner. Austin Daye was a good player who would have provided 2 more really good years in Spokane had he stayed. And at the time, this was not something that was happening very often at Gonzaga. It was happening other places, but Gonzaga was kind of still very staunchly in the we build program, we develop guys for 4 years, really. And we're not having guys leave early and go to the NBA. Like this isn't that, that's not what this school is. And that has of course changed. Gonzaga still develops talent better than most, pretty much all programs in college basketball, but we are far more accustomed to seeing players leave early and go to the NBA, or of course now transfer, as that is much more common. And we're talking about the one player, pretty much the one player on this list who's not a transfer in some capacity. And even so, he may not be a transfer, but he's still left Gonzaga earlier than anticipated. It's again a weird coincidence about these Californians for this Gonzaga program. But Austin Daye was a great player in the 2 years at Gonzaga. Until Brandon Clark came along, he had the single season blocks record. A prolific shot blocker, a prolific outside shooter in an era where those things were still very valued. That's why he went 15th in the 2009 NBA draft, despite not winning WCC Player of the Year, not even being an all WCC player. He was still the 15th pick in the NBA draft. Now, his NBA career didn't really pan out, but he's still playing professionally to this day, has had a long and prolific professional career. So Austin Daye to me is the number one player on this list, the number one Zag from California. And I don't think it's that close, but I know that he's not exactly a fan favorite by a lot of folks in Spokane. Number 2, now we're getting into the transfers. Number 2 on the list, Jordan Matthews. Jordan Matthews from Los Angeles, spent 1 year at Gonzaga, that national championship run in 2016-17. He had spent 3 previous years of his college basketball career at Cal. He was a graduate transfer who could play immediately from an eligibility perspective. And play he did. 39 games for Gonzaga that year, played about 28 minutes per game, averaged 10.5 points, 3 boards, 1.5 assists, shot 39% from 3. He was an NCAA all-region team member in the 2017 NCAA tournament. In that tournament, he made 17 threes. In those games Gonzaga was in, was an absolute sharpshooter for Gonzaga. One of those threes tended to get a little bit more attention than the other 16. That was, of course, that 3 he made against West Virginia to solidify Gonzaga going to the Elite Eight. A tremendous shot, one of the greatest shots in program history. Has, of course, been overshadowed by Jalen Suggs' shot a few years ago, but was truly one of the top shots in this program's history. He also is tied for the 10th most made threes in a single season in Gonzaga basketball history with 85. Again, a tremendous single season player for Gonzaga who gets the bump over a couple other great single season players at Gonzaga simply because he hit one of the most iconic shots in program history and happened to be on one of the best teams this program has ever had in that 2016-17 season. Number 3 on our list is a very similar player. Byron Wesley from Rancho Cucamonga, California, spent 1 year at Gonzaga in the 2014-15 season, so was there 2 years prior to Jordan Matthews. He also had spent 3 previous years at a Pac-12 school in California. For Wesley, it was USC. Of course, for Matthews, as we said, it was Cal. But Wesley's numbers are really similar to Jordan Matthews. Wesley played 38 games, Matthews played 39. Wesley played 27 minutes, Matthews played 28. Wesley averaged 10.5 points per game. So did Jordan Matthews, literally both of them at 10.6 points per game. Wesley did average more rebounds, 4.7, more assists, 2.3, more steals, 1.0 per game. He was a slightly more well-rounded player. That showed up by the fact that he was on the all-WCC second team. He scored 20 or more points 4 times for Gonzaga. That included 25 points in the WCC tournament against Pepperdine. That included 20-plus points at UCLA. You can take the USC out of the player, but they're still going to be anti-UCLA. So, of course, he went out and dropped 20 against them. Again, just really, really similar players in so many ways. They both played similar positions. They both transferred from power conference programs or Pac-12 programs. They both played the same role. They both scored the same amount of points. Matthews gets the bump because of that shot against West Virginia, but it's really close. And Wesley's numbers were very similar. And in fact, Byron Wesley was a catalyst for Gonzaga's run in that 14-15 season. I mean, that team went to the Elite Eight and lost to Duke, and Byron Wesley was a huge part of that. So it's not lost on me how similar these two players who come in at number 2 and 3 on this list really are when comparing them to each other and trying to make this list work. Number 4 on the list is also a transfer, although it is a junior college transfer from San Diego, California. That would be Marquise Carter. Marquise Carter spent 2 years at Gonzaga in 2010, 2011, and then 2011, 2012. Played 68 games, started 21 of them, played just 16.5 minutes per night, averaged about 5 points, 2 assists. He was the WCC Rookie of the Year in 2011. He was also the WCC Tournament MVP and made the all-tournament team. Marquise Carter spent 2 years at Gonzaga and was a really good player for about 8 games. The rest of the time, he was fine, but he absolutely balled out at the end of his first season with Gonzaga. He had 20 points against Santa Clara, 18 points against San Francisco towards the end of the regular season. Then he had 18 points versus San Francisco in the WCC tournament. Then he had 11 points, 4 rebounds versus St. Mary's in the WCC tournament title game. That is how he ended up winning the WCC tournament MVP. And then in the NCAA tournament against St. John's, Carter had 24 points, 6 assists, 6 rebounds, and 2 steals against the Johnnies in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Before Gonzaga, they won that game, and then they lost to BYU in the second round. Carter was not nearly as good his sophomore, or I guess his senior season, his second year at Gonzaga, only averaged 3.5 points per game in about 13 minutes. So his career kind of ended on a sour note, but he was prolific for that stretch towards the end of his first season in Spokane, and that alone gets him a spot at number 4 on this list. Number 5 is a very familiar face for Gonzaga fans from Sherman Oaks, California. That would be Dusty Stromer. Dusty Stromer spent 2 years at Gonzaga, 23-24, and last year, 24-25. He has since transferred to Grand Canyon, where he will play this upcoming season. Stromer played 69 games at Gonzaga, started 16 of them, 20.5 minutes per game, averaged 4.5 points, little under 3 boards, shot 35% from 3. We all know the Dusty Stromer story. He started as a true freshman because of the injury to Steele Venters right before the season began. He had some good moments, but was also a little bit overwhelmed in that starting lineup. Gonzaga made the switch to start Ben Gregg for the second half of the season. Dusty was really good the second half of his freshman year, came back as a sophomore with high expectations and just wasn't really able to meet them. He struggled to find his outside shot as a sophomore. He was struggling offensively, making a lot of bad passes. His defense was good, but it wasn't better than Emmanuel Innocentes, and eventually he lost playing time throughout the season. Between losing playing time to Innocente, between Gonzaga adding Jalen Warley in the transfer portal, Dusty Stromer made what was probably the wise decision to hit the transfer portal and should get a much better opportunity to play at Grand Canyon next year. Regardless, even in those 2 years, Dusty ends up being just inside the top 5 for our greatest California Zags in the Mark Few era. Now we got some more guys to talk about. We got a bench piece for Gonzaga's iconic 2017 team. We also got an original member of the Tricky Trio to round out our California Zags rankings. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, PrizePicks is the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every single day, but on PrizePicks, being right means cashing in. And with football back, PrizePicks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes all in less than 60 seconds. I've been playing PrizePicks for the last couple of years. It's such a fun way to get ready for the season, whether it's football, college basketball, baseball, whatever it may be. It's quick, it's easy, and honestly, it's my favorite way to follow along with football. Monday Night Football, Tampa Bay quarterback Baker Mayfield, over under 1.5 passing touchdowns. If you're listening to this game, it's before they take on Houston tonight. If it's still beforehand, you think Baker's going to throw 2 or more tutties, might be a good time to get in on the action. And even if the best part is that even if one of your picks misses, PrizePicks invented the flex play, so you can still double your money. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5. PrizePicks. It's good to be right. Folks, the NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. One of the great things about FanDuel is that it fits however you bet, whether it's player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to your days. Gonzaga right now, plus 3,500 to take home that first coveted national championship trophy and bring it back to Spokane in 2026. Are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. All right, folks, segment 3 is still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags, and we are still ranking the best Zags in the Mark Few era from the great state of California. We talked 1 through 5 in the first segment, our lone non-transfer in Austin Daye, followed by a pair of grad transfers, Jordan Matthews and Byron Wesley, followed by JUCO transfer Marquise Carter, and then recent Zag Dusty Stromer at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 6 from Northridge, California, a key part of Gonzaga's 2016-17 national championship appearance team. That would be Brian Alberts. Brian Alberts spent 2 years at Gonzaga, 2015-16 and again 2016-17. After that, he ended up transferring to Long Beach State. Once again, another transfer on this list. But while at Gonzaga, Alberts played in 57 games, started 10 of them, averaged about 9 minutes, 2.3 points, 1 rebound, shot about 34% from 3. Alberts was a quality depth guard option for Gonzaga. Again, that 16-17 team was so insanely deep. They had Nigel Williams-Goss and Josh Perkins starting. They had Jordan Matthews starting. They had Silas Melson coming off the bench. Alberts was kind of behind all of those guys, so he had a hard time cracking into the lineup. In fact, he only played about 6 minutes per game that year and averaged just under 2 points. But the previous year, before Gonzaga had Matthews, before Gonzaga had Williams-Goss, Alberts did play quite a bit more that year. So it was a quality player for 2 years, just never really got the playing time to kind of show what he was capable of doing. And we saw that bear itself out when he transferred. He goes to Long Beach State. Yes, it's the Big West. Yes, it's a weaker league and obviously a weaker team, but he averaged 11 points per game in 2 years for Long Beach State. So a very good player, a fun player to watch in his 2 years in this program. He comes in at number 6. The difference between 6, 7, and 8 was very minuscule. Just like it was tough to pick between Byron Wesley and Jordan Matthews because they were very similar, these 3 players were all pretty similar as well. Next up on the list, number 7 from Murrieta, California, the original member of the Tricky Trio. That would, of course, be guard Dominic Harris. Dom spent technically 3 years at Gonzaga before transferring to LMU, then transferring to UCLA, and then again for this upcoming season transferring to Loyola Chicago. While he was at Gonzaga for 3 years, Dom did only play in 38 games due to some serious injury issues. Averaged 6 minutes per game, 2.5 points, shot 35% from 3. Dom played 25 games as a freshman on that outstanding 2020-21 team that, of course, went undefeated until they ran into Baylor in the national championship game. He then sat the entire 21-22 season with a foot injury and then was limited to just 13 games in his final season in Spokane in 22-23, also because of an injury, but also because he just wasn't in the rotation for that Gonzaga team, was struggling to find playing time. That's why he hit the transfer portal. He lands at LMU, where he leads the Lions in scoring 14 points a game and led the WCC in three-point percentage just under 45%. Again, then goes to UCLA, does not play much for the Bruins now. Will finish out his college career at Loyola Chicago. But Dom does get a bit of a bump for being part of the Tricky Trio, for being part of the reason that Gonzaga landed Julian Strother and Jalen Suggs and had such a tremendous class that year. And again, Dom and Brian Alberts, very similar numbers, and so too is number 8 on this list, a guy that a lot of fans will be a little bit less familiar with because he played in an older era for Gonzaga. That would be Larry Gerganius from Oakland, California. Gerganius played at Gonzaga from 2005 to 2008 before he, you guessed it, transferred, this time landing also in the Big West at UC Riverside. Gerganius played 56 games for Gonzaga, about 9 minutes per game, 2.5 points, 2 boards, and about a half an assist a game. As a freshman in the 05-06 season, Gerganius averaged 1.5 points in 7.4 minutes per game. He then sat the entire 06-07 season before having his best season in 2007-2008, where he averaged 3.5 points and about 3 rebounds in 25 games and 12 minutes per game. He then goes to UC Riverside after sitting out a year and averages 8 points, 6.5 boards, and 2 assists for Riverside in that 2009-2010 season. So once again, just to emphasize the similarities here, Alberts, 57 games, 9 minutes a game, 2.3 points. Dom, 38 games, 6 minutes a game, 2.5 points. Gerganius, 56 games, 9 minutes per game, 2.4 points. Very, very similar for those 3 players who all ended up transferring, 2 of them to Big West schools, 1 of them, Dom, to a school in the WCC. Very similar players, very similar productivity for their years in Spokane. So that's 6, 7, 8 for Gonzaga. Number 9, we finish out the list. There was a handful of walk-ons from the state of California. And I wanted to have number 10 be basically all of those walk-ons lumped together. But since we were out of players after 8, I figured we'll give one of the walk-ons a little bit of a bump, and that would be one of the more recent walk-ons from the state of California. Far and away the most productive of this group of players. That would be Colby Brooks. Colby Brooks from Los Angeles spent 2 years at Gonzaga, transferred to San Diego after that. It does keep the tradition of talking about transfers alive. Brooks played 22 games in Spokane, 3 minutes per game, averaged 1.5 points, 1 board, shot 50% from the field. He was a walk-on with some legit skill, a player who was a productive high school player in the state of California, and kind of came to Gonzaga with like, hey, this is maybe a walk-on who could carve out a role. He never really did that, but we did see some promise from him when he was on the floor. 6'7" lefty wing, decent rebounder, showed some promise as an outside shooter. Like we said, he hits the transfer portal. He ends up at San Diego, and he didn't play a huge role last year for the Toreros, but he did start a pair of games. One of them was against Gonzaga in Spokane, kind of a cool nod for Steve Lavin to give him that opportunity to start. And now he's currently in the transfer portal again, has yet to commit as of this writing. I don't know if that means he's going to play a non-D1 school, if he's going to just go to school somewhere and not continue to play basketball. I'm not sure what the situation will be for Brooks, but was one of the better talent-wise walk-ons that Gonzaga has had. So he gets a bit of a bump here at number 9 on the list. Number 10 is really number 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, as we're going to talk about five different players here very quickly. One of them we've already mentioned, Joaquin Reyes-Moore, Q, who's on the roster right now as a walk-on. Jack Beach spent 4 years at Gonzaga, scored 16 total points in his career. Brian Baskar scored 9 points for Gonzaga in 32 minutes across 2 seasons. So those guys all get a little bit of a bump here. And then we had 2 other players on the list who also were transfers, since that seems to be the theme of the California Zags episode. One of them, David Burgess, transferred from BYU to Gonzaga and appeared in 6 games. I think this was back in 2005 for Gonzaga. And then Dustin Villapig transferred from Gonzaga to UNLV. He only played 4 games in a Gonzaga uniform, then sat out a year, then transferred to UNLV and played for them for a couple of years. So a lot of transfers, a lot of guys with similar statistical outputs. No real superstars. The closest to a superstar we really have is Austin Daye. Obviously, Jordan Matthews had his superstar moment, but mostly was a lot of good players, good role players coming from the state of California. Obviously, the biggest notable through line for so many of these guys was transferring either in or out of this Gonzaga program. It's very fun for me to do these. I hope you guys are enjoying them. We got a lot more coming your way here in the next couple of weeks, a couple of months before the season begins. We'll talk about Texas. We'll talk about some other states that have had a few great players coming through. Arizona should be on the list. I think Tennessee will be on the list. And then we'll talk some countries as well. We'll talk some Canadian Zags, some international Zags from Asia, some international Zags from other European countries as well. Thanks again, folks, for listening. That is going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. We'll have more coming your way. We'll talk some more recruiting updates as we get them. Keep you up to date on what's going on with this roster as it has come together. Practices getting underway here very soon as well. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.